Hey everybody, Marcus here. When I was still in my blue pill days, years before I discovered MGTOW, one could expect from me what one could expect from pretty much any blue pill man as it pertains to a man's disposition towards women. About 6 months after my wife left me, I got back onto the dating scene. I started dating an Irish girl. This was the first Irish girl I had ever dated and the first time I had been back on the dating scene in a decade. As this was a time long before Tinder, and she was of my generation, there was still a semblance of the old approach of dinners, movies, and so on. On the first date, we met for coffee. After the scheduled hour was over, I concluded there was enough there to warrant a second date. As I usually do on first dates, I kissed this girl and left. Her receptivity to the kiss was enough for me to determine whether or not she was interested. Anyways, after I kissed her, her being the first girl I had kissed since my wife, I experienced a slightly strange taste. Though this strange taste registered with me on the conscious level, I rationalized it away as a combination of the taste of coffee in her mouth and, well, her just being a different person and me not being exactly used to kissing other women. Suffice to say, I paid little heed to this event. Our next date was a longer evening where I took her to a comedy club. It was one of those $5 entry fee places where local comics would practice their new material to see if they wanted to integrate it into their main act. The comics were sometimes inconsistent in their routines. In fact, some went as far as reading new parts of their routine straight from a piece of paper. Overall, however, the shows were good and the $5 price tag appropriately reflected the nature of the beast. You still got a solid 2 hour show composed of half a dozen comics. This Irish girl and I drank a bit at the show and eventually started to make out somewhere near the back of the room. Once again, this strange taste became apparent. As making out involved substantially more contact than a single kiss, it began to loom strongly on my mind of what exactly is going on. However, as the feeling was pleasant, I tried to make the best of it. I ended up taking her home where we had sex. As I went down on her, the smell that I experienced, though not potent or overwhelming, triggered in me a similar experience of repulsion as the taste I got from kissing her. However, by that time we were sort of drunk, and those thoughts were fleeting and passing during the actual sex act. The next morning, she took a shower, brushed her teeth with what I suspect was a toothbrush she brought with her, and we had sex again. Now, I saw her shower. I saw her brush her teeth, but that damn taste and smell was still there. By this point, this shit was starting to mess with my head. It was beginning to become progressively more repulsive to me. Also, some of her scent seeped into my bed sheets, which I did not realize until I tried to sleep that night. It was, well, really bad. I had to change the sheets before I could get to sleep. We had one more date after that, which once again ended in sex. However, by that point, I was already dreading experiencing that taste and smell. To my lack of surprise, it was ever present once again. I had to change the sheets again before going to bed. I stopped dating her after that third date. I didn't know what it was. I didn't care. I figured there's something fucked up about her and moved on. A few weeks later, I had a one night stand with some other random Irish girl. Lo and behold, almost the exact same taste and smell came off this girl. This was too big of a coincidence for me to ignore. By that time, this phenomenon started to make me a little paranoid. Is this what girls smell and taste like these days? Was this what I could come to expect from the future? I started dwelling upon this phenomenon quite intensely. I remember thinking back to several incidents in my marriage that I believed shed some clues on the issue. After sex with my wife, which would typically involve a lot of sweating on my part due to, well, doing all the work, the wife and I would typically leave the bedroom to return to it later to sleep. However, from time to time she would comment how the room smells like Marcus. This was never said in a pejorative manner, but merely as an observation. When I would come back from the gym, she would sometimes also comment how Marcus-like I smell. Reflection on these incidents spurred in me the idea of people having natural scents. These were not scents due to lack of hygiene, but something like a fingerprint of smell. Perhaps not as unique as a fingerprint, but something similar. Perhaps people, through some physiological disposition, are repulsed by one such scent over another due to no fault of their own or their partners. I started asking my friends whether or not they had ever experienced anything similar. Specifically, I asked them whether or not they had encountered a woman who they were repulsed by based on smell or taste alone. Most had to dwell upon the question before answering. It turned out that some had at some point in their lives experienced this repulsion, while others had not. None, however, had ever registered this phenomenon strongly enough to cause any sort of investigation on their part. I was on my own in unraveling this mystery. I started doing research on the subject. The theory of natural scent fingerprints seemed somewhat viable. After all, when animals go into heat, the male of the species can pick up on that. Dogs do a lot of butt sniffing, which I suspect has a similar function. I eventually stumbled upon an article that talked about bees. The article was saying that bees release these things called pheromones within the hive that change the physiology and behavior of other bees. So, I looked up pheromones in humans. Ha, lo and behold, apparently scientists suspect human pheromones exist. This is an excerpt from an article on this subject. Humans and other animals have an olfactory system designed to detect and discriminate between thousands of chemical compounds. For more than 50 years, scientists have been aware of the fact that certain insects and animals can release chemical compounds, often as oils or sweat, and that other creatures can detect and respond to these compounds, which allows for a form of silent, purely chemical communication. Although the exact definition has been debated and redefined several times, pheromones are generally recognized as single or small sets of compounds that transmit signals between organisms of the same species. They are typically just one part of the large potpourri of odorants emitted from an insect or animal, and some pheromones do not have a discernible scent. Since pheromones were since defined in 1959, scientists have found many examples of pheromonal communication. The most striking of these signals elicits an immediate behavioral response. For example, the female silk moth releases a trail of the molecule bombicol, which unerringly draws males from the moment they encounter it. Slower acting pheromones can affect the recipient's reproductive physiology, as when the alpha farnesene molecule in male mice urine accelerates puberty in young female mice. Some researchers have proposed a third group of pheromones called signalers that simply transmit information, such as an individual's social status or health. Mice can select appropriate mates based on odor cues, deriving information in part from unique proteins associated with a mouse's genetics. So far, scientists have had some success in demonstrating that exposure to body odor can elicit responses in other humans. As in rodent research, human sweat and secretions can affect the reproductive readiness of other humans. Since the 1970s, researchers have observed changes in a woman's menstrual cycle when she is exposed to the sweat of other women. In 2011, a Florida State University group demonstrated that the scent of ovulating women could cause testosterone levels to increase in men. But there's no evidence of a consistent and strong behavioral response to any human-produced chemical cue. Maybe once upon a time we could react more viscerally, says chemist George Preddy of the Monell Chemical Sense Center. Today, however, our reactions seem to be much subtler and harder to detect than those of silk moths. This subtlety has led researchers to propose another kind of chemical messenger, known as modulator pheromone, that affects the mood or mental state of the recipient. In an example of this type, researchers at Stony Brook University found in 2009 that sniffing the sweat of first-time parachute jumpers could increase a person's ability to discriminate between ambiguous emotional expressions. The implication is that chemicals in the jumper's sweat might constitute an alarm signal, which puts the recipient on high alert and makes them more attentive to details. The article I just read out is but one compilation of opinions on the subject. However, my research into human pheromones led me to something altogether unexpected. It led me to discover a pheromone cologne industry. That's right, there are colognes you can buy on the commercial market which are laced with pheromones. But does pheromone cologne work? Well, the short answer is yes. Oh, they work. They work incredibly well if you come to understand how to use them. When I first discovered pheromone colognes about 5 years ago, I was pretty skeptical about the subject. It was at least a month of research into the subject before I bothered buying anything. Now, what I want to do for the rest of this video is to share with you my experience with pheromone colognes so you can judge for yourself as to whether or not this is something you would want to research on your own. In the first case, the science on the subject is somewhat mixed. However, due to my own experience, I have grown convinced that the science simply needs to catch up to observable reality. I do not intend on going into the science itself because it is not as interesting as the application. I like to think of the science of human pheromones to be on the following level. Before germs were discovered, some people clued in that washing your hands seems to have health benefits. No one really understood why or how, but the lived experience told a story that indicated that for some reason it works. Human pheromone science to me appears to be somewhat at this level. It can't really put its finger on it and therefore give a particularly good accounting of it, so there is no formal scientific stamp of approval on the effectiveness of pheromone cologne per se. However, based on the research that had been done on human pheromones by scientists, there is, in my opinion, sufficient reason to believe that, though there is no definitive scientific confirmation of this as of yet, it is really only a matter of time before there will be. Take from that position what you would like. As far as I am concerned, based on my own experience, this stuff works just fine. The first thing we need to point out, however, is that, like with anything that is unregulated and scientifically murky, you will find a lot of charlatans selling snake oil. This too is true in the pheromone cologne industry. The most well-known snake oil cologne is called Pheromone. Though the cologne smells nice as a cologne, it really does not exhibit the sort of effects one would hope would come of it. As such, in this video, I will only discuss the 3 pheromone colognes I use and can confirm that work. The brand names for these colognes are Scent of Eros, Alpha 7, and A314. The first thing we need to talk about when we talk about pheromone colognes is that they are not really colognes most of the time. Some pheromone colognes come in spray bottles like your typical off-the-shelf Emporio Armani, but most do not. Most come in tiny 10 milliliter bottles of oil. These bottles of oil are sometimes sold with a scent and sometimes without one. It is not the actual smell that one registers consciously that does the work, but the unscented molecules that enter through the olfactory system. As such, it is quite possible and common to wear a pheromone cologne along with a regular off-the-shelf cologne or aftershave. The second thing to consider is their effective range. Pheromone colognes have around a 2 to 5 meter range of effectiveness. It takes about 5 minutes of sitting in one place before the area is saturated with them. The effects might kick in sooner than that, but you usually need to give them a few minutes to work. The effective duration of the colognes are about 3 to 5 hours. This means that you will need to reapply after that point. This is, well, not always the case, but it is a good rule of thumb. For specific details, you would need to look to each particular cologne that you are wearing. Now, the question I am sure you are all curious about is this: what do they actually do? Now, this is a somewhat complicated question. Firstly, we must understand that pheromone colognes are not magic love potions. It will not be the case that when you put them on that women will throw themselves at you. Well, though something like this has actually happened to me. But no, pheromone colognes create dispositions in those around you and even within yourself. Imagine this. Imagine you walk into a bar you have never been in before. You look at all the people there and you quickly come to see that everyone is muscularly built, tattooed, head shaved, and some have scruffy beards. You might think to yourself, oh shit, I just walked into a biker bar. Or, oh shit, these people are all skinheads. If you found yourself in that situation, you might immediately take on a disposition of great caution. You might sense danger. In turn, this disposition would inform your actions. Either you would leave immediately or you would pretend like nothing is the matter, but be incredibly nervous while you order that one beer which you try to drink quickly before making your escape. The point is that based on your sense of sight coupled with stereotyping, you instantly fell into a certain disposition. Now imagine a different scenario. Imagine you just walked out of a job interview you know you aced. Your disposition walking out of that interview will be one of immense confidence. Basically, the exchange between you and the interviewer led to the formulation of a disposition of confidence. You feel like you can conquer the world. Pheromone colognes work on this principle. They radically help in bringing about certain dispositions in people. Each pheromone cologne is intrinsically tied to the generation of, typically, one type of disposition. Let us go over the 3 colognes I listed earlier and describe what dispositions they create. Scent of Eros is the first on our list. Scent of Eros is typically called the social lubricant. Simply put, it helps make people more talkative. It creates within them a heightened desire to socialize. When someone is of this disposition, they become much more receptive to talking to strangers, for example. The conversations seem to flow more naturally. The experience of conversing just seems more fun and pleasurable. Now think about it. Imagine you were in a somewhat neutral mood, and then someone casually starts talking to you. Within a minute or so, you start to feel a bit more talkative. The conversation is flowing, your mood is improving, and so on. Would you not then think to yourself, wow, that's a really cool guy? Well, sure you would. The good feelings helped along by the pheromones would be projected as a positive image onto you. Now, remember how I said that these colognes have a range of 2 to 5 meters? Well, imagine this situation. You walk into a bar and scan the room. You see a table of attractive women you might want to talk to. You buy yourself a beer and sit down with your friend at a table close to the group of women. You sit there for 5 to 10 minutes talking to your friend while the pheromones saturate the area. The women subtly become more upbeat due to the effect of the cologne. Now they are more in the mood to interact with strangers. After those 5 to 10 minutes, you turn around and start talking to them. However, because these colognes have a 2 to 5 meter range, you need to also consider the density of the environment that you are in. If you are on the dance floor of a busy club, there will be very little opportunity for anyone to pinpoint you as the origin of the effect these colognes create, though they will have some effect on everyone around you. These colognes work best when it is clear to other people that you are the originator of their disposition. As such, you are best off using them in situations that will warrant a lot more one-to-one interactions. However, this does not mean you will not have luck in densely packed groups. It just means it will be a bit more hit and miss. If you are standing next to a girl in a packed club, she will figure out it is you emanating that scent. But the girl across the bar may think it is the bartender instead. Earlier, I also said that these pheromone colognes work on you. So, after a few minutes of putting on scent of Eros, for example, you yourself become more socially lubricated. Scent of Eros seems to have the same effect on both men and women. This means that there are countless applications of this pheromone outside of pickup. Personally, I use scent of Eros for job interviews and all relatively important business functions. Remember, there are unscented versions available, so there's no worry about the appropriateness of cologne in any given situation. It is always to your advantage to interact with people who are in the mood to be socializing to begin with. Of course, this cologne is not magic. If someone is truly in a terrible mood, it may help, but will not necessarily turn them completely around. Scent of Eros, after all, does have its limits. The next cologne that has become part of my mainstay is Alpha 7. Alpha 7 is typically known as raw sexual magnetism. The disposition it creates in a person is one of perceiving the wearer as a sexually charged being. However, let us be very careful about what we mean by this. Alpha 7 should not be perceived as a cologne that necessarily makes a woman sexually attracted to you. What it does is place you in her mind as a sexual being. Basically, it triggers an evaluative process as to whether or not she will fuck you. Though this would happen anyways, Alpha 7 has a way of continually pushing that valuation back into her mind. So, where a woman may judge whether or not she will fuck you in the first 30 seconds of seeing you and set that as her final decision in a normal engagement, Alpha 7 has a way of bringing that evaluation back into her mind. Though she may dismiss you initially, something will nag at the back of her mind to reconsider. Alpha 7 also has the tendency to make the wearer horny, and as such, it is very likely it makes those around him a little horny as well. Do not be surprised if you get a boner within the first 15 minutes of putting it on. Now, clearly, what I have said as to the psychological events that take place in a woman's mind as a consequence of encountering someone wearing Alpha 7, well, is in the realm of speculation. The story I just told is what I suspect is basically happening. Alpha 7 seems to hinder a woman's ability to dismiss your sexuality out of hand. The sentence that women have uttered to me that best describes the effects goes along the lines as follows. You're not usually my type, but I can make an exception. Alpha 7, well, may sound all well and good on the surface, but there are radical caveats to its usage too. Remember, this is a value-free disposition-forming mechanism. Though a woman may see you as a sexualized being and by virtue of that be more likely to consider you a sexual candidate, It is also possible that the valuation may go in another direction. The sexualized vibe she may end up perceiving in you is not of a stud, but one of a rapist or creepy sexual deviant. Alpha 7 is not something you ever want to wear to work, for example. Being perceived in a sexual manner in such an environment might see you slapped with a sexual harassment lawsuit. The nature of the sexually charged disposition that Alpha 7 creates is contingent on the dose you wear, along with your behavior, age of the woman, and environment. I'll be talking about dosing later in this video, but for now it is sufficient to note that you can overdose on pheromone colognes. However, if used correctly, Alpha 7 is the sort of cologne that can potentially get women to throw themselves at you. Trust me. If you read testimonials pertaining to Alpha 7, you will fairly frequently encounter reports of women doing just that. In my own experience, the most extreme example I can cite is when two 19-year-old French au pairs started fighting over me in a bar. Another thing to watch out for with Alpha 7 is the reaction you get from men. Men will also perceive you as a sexualized being. However, unlike women, who may want to fuck you, men will see you more as a threat. Men may become more aggressive in their interaction with you. They may start displaying more competitive attitudes. In some men, it may trigger a white knight instinct. Alpha 7 can make you look like David Beckham, or it can make you look like some balding trench coat wearing public masturbating peeping Tom pervert. Both are highly sexualized beings, but only one is desirable. The last of the three colognes I use is called A314. Out of all three of these colognes, I like this one the best. A314 is simply referred to as the James Bond effect. The best way to describe the disposition it creates in others is that of status. When you are wearing A314, you are perceived as if you are somebody important. Sometimes, when you look at a person or speak to them, you get a sense as if they really made it in life, like their ship has come in, like everything seems to be going well for them. These people look like they matter in some way. This is the disposition that A314 seems to create in people about you. When you wear A314, people become more curious about your opinions. They accept your answers without as much questioning. They look for reasons to agree with you and justify your opinions in their own words, and so on. A314 works like that. It is a cologne I wear to everything important I do in business. Clearly, it also has its applications in pickup. There are many more pheromone colognes on the market. I've used several others that I have so far not talked about. The reason I do not talk about the others will be made clearer as we further come to understand how to effectively use these colognes. The next thing I want to cover in regard to pheromone colognes is dosing. Some of these colognes can be overdosed while others cannot. However, where a cologne cannot be overdosed, applying more than what is necessary is just wasting product and has no further effect. Scent of Eros cannot be overdosed. Scent of Eros comes in a small glass vial with a roll-on head. You apply it to either your neck or forearms. The dose is measured in inches rolled on. Think of the roll-on deodorant you can buy in stores. This deodorant you roll around on your armpits until you are satisfied you have applied enough. Well, Scent of Eros is a roll-on like that. However, you do not roll it on indiscriminately. The standard dose, which is typically the maximum dose you can take before any further use has no effect, is 2 6-inch strips. So, you would roll on a 6-inch strip on one forearm and another 6-inch strip on the other forearm, and you're good to go. The application of all pheromone colognes must be done on skin. The colognes are usually oils and they diffuse through your body hair and body heat. If you put it onto clothing, it will be much less effective. If you were to put on more than 2 6-inch strips of Scent of Eros, you are just wasting product. But other than that, nothing bad will happen. Alpha 7, on the other hand, can be overdosed. An overdose of a pheromone means a few things. Firstly, you are wasting product. Secondly, it will almost certainly give you a bit of a headache, and rarely it can make you a little nauseous. Thirdly, it will not only not help generate the desired dispositions in people, but in fact will almost certainly generate a completely undesirable effect. If you overdose with Alpha 7, you will come across as incredibly creepy and most likely seem dangerous. You will scare women away from you. Men will look at you with suspicion and so on. Imagine a serial rapist and murderer who became well known by the televised nature of his court case. A little bit like O.J. Simpson. Well, when you interact with strangers, the disposition you generate is going to be a bit like that if you overdose on alpha 7. Underdosing, on the other hand, may only see very trivial gains. If you underdose alpha 7, at best you might seem a little more sexual than you normally are, but probably not much more than you are if you were not to wear any alpha 7 at all. So, what is the correct dose? Well, it depends. Alpha 7 comes in a dark glass bottle with a nozzle that will let you drip out one drop of the oil at a time. Doses are measured in drops. To figure out how many drops is the correct dose for you, you will need to experiment. Remember, you naturally emit these pheromones already. When you wear alpha 7, what you are trying to do is supplement what you naturally produce. Now, just as a side note, alpha 7 contains a pheromone called androstenol. Androstenol is produced by the testicles. This is the pheromone you are trying to supplement. However, when you wear alpha 7, you are not biologically stimulating your body to produce more androstenol, but you are merely putting androstenol on your skin to be diffused into the air. If you are a particularly sexual being, you might not actually want to wear any alpha 7 at all. A single drop may be an overdose for such a person. For most people, however, it is likely they can safely wear a few drops at a time. In order to figure out your dosing, you will need to run a fairly long experiment. For about a month of casual going out or 2 weeks of heavy social activity, wear only one drop per night. Do your usual socializing and try to pay attention if anything out of the ordinary is happening. Keep a journal of everything and review it at the end of the month. The second month, wear 2 drops per night out. Keep your journal and so on. In this way, keep incrementing the dose by 1 drop per month. If you put on 2 drops and start getting a headache, you've probably overdosed. However, that might not necessarily be the case. For example, if you put the drops on your neck, you will be getting a big whiff of the stuff pretty much with every breath you take. This may give you a headache, but may not entail an overdose. Try placing the alpha 7 on your forearms instead. The point is, an overdose is best detected when people's behavior around you begins to go south. The story your journal will tell you can be put in the form of a graph. The line on the graph ascends to a certain peak and then suddenly drops off with the next higher dosage. You can plot this graph by counting up the incidence of positive responses from women in each month. Whatever other reasons you may dream up as to why those responses from women were positive, one thing you will not be able to deny is that their frequency has been going up until you overdosed. My optimal dose was 3 drops of alpha 7 at one time. Namely, I would put on 3 drops at the same time before I went out. A314 is also one of those pheromones on which you can overdose. The same symptoms of headache and undesirable behavior towards me were noted. With A314, an overdose just makes you look like an asshole full of yourself. Gone will be the disposition of status, and in its place you will see a disposition that makes you appear pretentious and pompous. Other possible responses you may see from people to an overdose of A314 is panic. People may not want to be in the room with you, talk to you, and generally have a strange, undirected fear towards you. You will just make them feel uncomfortable by your very presence. A314 is also measured in drops, and your ideal dose can be computed in the same manner as alpha 7. My ideal dose of A314 is 1 drop. The next thing we need to talk about is blending. You can blend any number of these pheromone colognes together to come up with something unique. However, before anyone begins to blend, they need to understand what they can come to expect from each cologne independent of all the others. As such, only wear one cologne at a time until you know how it works. Usually, you will figure this out as you are determining your own ideal dose. However, once you have figured out the ideal dose for a few colognes, you can start wearing more than one at a time and see what happens. Personally, I always wear scent of Eros if I plan on wearing any pheromone cologne at all. The social lubricating quality of scent of Eros is universally desirable in social situations. When I attend important business meetings, I blend scent of Eros with A314. To a club or bar, I might combine scent of Eros with alpha 7. scent of Eros with A314, or wear all three at the same time. Technically, scent of Eros, alpha 7, and A314 are blends in of themselves. If you really wanted to go hardcore, you could buy pure pheromones like androstenedione, androstenone, androstenol, androsterone, estratetraenol, or beta-androstenol, and then create a purely original blend. However, I would advise against this as the results can be completely unpredictable and would require extensive field testing to see what they do. Stick to the named blends like scent of Eros and alpha 7, then blend these named colognes instead. There's another point that needs to be noted in terms of blending. When you blend pheromone colognes, the effects do not stack. Not exactly. This means that if you blend scent of Eros with alpha 7, that you will not get the exact effects of scent of Eros plus the exact effects of alpha 7 if you wore them individually. What you will get is a third thing. You will get a tempered version of the effects of alpha 7 along with most of the social lubricating qualities of scent of Eros. Think about it. If there was a pheromone that created a disposition of fear, and you mix that with a pheromone that created a disposition of comfort and ease, you could clearly not create fear and ease as dispositions in the same person at the same time. No, you would get something in between. Perhaps you would get a disposition of deference or respect or something like that. Well, blending pheromone colognes creates unique effects in this manner. As such, you might come to discover that you actually prefer not to blend at all, as the disposition that only one pheromone cologne creates is ideal for you. From this, it should become clear why I would not just blend all three of these pheromone colognes each time I go out. However, there's a secondary reason why you might not want to blend or wear certain pheromone colognes at all. These colognes work in conjunction with your mood. Remember, these colognes create dispositions as a sort of first impression. You can shatter that impression pretty easily. Imagine this. Imagine you see a tattooed, shaved head, built guy sitting at a bar. He may look intimidating as fuck. However, when you start talking to him, he comes across as a weak pussy. That sense of intimidation is shattered instantly. The same thing can happen with you and pheromone colognes. If you wear alpha 7, you may initially project an impression of assertive sexual magnetism in a woman just by standing near her. However, if you start talking to her and come across as an insecure wuss, then the disposition the cologne set in her mind will instantly vanish. The cologne you are wearing is not going to do you any more favors with that woman that day. Basically, you completely blew the advantage that the cologne gave you. As such, the blend I choose for any given night will correspond to the behavior I am in the mood to play out that night. These colognes do not close deals for you. They are not substitutes for confidence, assertiveness, social skills, or anything like that. What they do is stack the deck in your favor. But if you play your hand badly, then you are out of luck. Because of this, you cannot go willy-nilly buying colognes that help with dispositions that directly clash with your own personality. If you wear alpha 7 to generate sexual magnetism, you better damn well be prepared to behave in a sexualized manner. You need to have the confidence to touch a woman, to dance perhaps, drop sexual innuendo into what you say, and so on. If you cannot actively live out sexual magnetism the cologne is suggesting that you possess, then you are wasting your time and money using it. This is why I did not bring up colognes other than the three I use. I am very well suited to the three colognes I use, and not so much to the others. I can live out the blends I compose as well. Since I can live out the blends I compose, I do not shatter the dispositions they put into play. The prices of these colognes vary. Some are much cheaper than others. Normally, you are looking to pay at least $50 for a bottle. The price can go as high as $100 for something like A314. Small sample bottles are also possible to attain for the purpose of experimenting. Some of the samples are spray bottles, much like off-the-shelf cologne. Those spray bottles are dosed based on squirts. Depending on how often you use them, they can last anywhere from 3 months to years. Your frequency of replacement will also depend on how high your optimal dose is. If you need 3 drops of alpha 7, you will go through it 3 times quicker than if you only needed 1 drop. Anyways, I hope that this video gave you a bit of an introduction to the world of pheromone colognes. If you think this is all placebo nonsense, well, then so be it. Today, I use it mostly for business, and it works just fine. I have recommended these colognes to many friends. Some half-assed it and concluded it is not for them. Well, as far as such friends are concerned, I bought their product off them and, well, they were more than happy to oblige me. Others, who took the time to figure them out, report the same sort of experiences I am reporting to you. In his video entitled The Vagina Monsters, Sandman talks about copulence. Though he took the subject in a silly direction, I can add something to that discussion. Copulants are female hormones used in pheromone colognes for women. The disposition they are meant to produce is a simple one of desire. Copulants are released by the vagina when a girl gets wet. Their purpose can probably be speculated to be no more mysterious than the purpose of that which is produced by any animal in heat. They signal, through influencing the male mind via the olfactory system, to produce a favorable disposition toward that woman. In that capacity, copulants act as a pheromone in the same manner as androstenol and androstenone does in the male pheromone colognes. All of Sandman's talk in relation to copulants producing a mind control effect just sounds to me like a sensationalized version of the behavior that might follow suit of a man doing and saying, well, what he believes will just get him laid. Though the exact image that Sandman painted in his Vagina Monster video is a little silly, there is a nugget of truth in the matter. Anyways, I've put 2 links in the description to the 2 companies I know sell legitimate products. I cannot vouch for any other sellers other than these 2 companies. If you do want to experiment with this stuff, then get a bottle of scent of Eros. Try that out and see if indeed you experience, on average, an increase in sociable behavior and ease of conversation flow in a few months of experimentation. In the worst case, you're out $50. In the best case, you discover what I have. Alternatively, you can buy a few small samples of several of the different products. You can spend as little as $15 on a small sample version of many of the products on offer. There is one more application to pheromone colognes that should be noted. Other than pickup and business, you can use them for therapeutic purposes. As these colognes alter your disposition, as well as those around you, you can use them as a fake it till you make it tool. One of the colognes I did not mention in this video is called Instant Shine. Instant Shine makes you feel confident and generally puts you in a good mood. If you have confidence issues, you can just put it on when you need a confidence boost. Now, let me just wind up the story of the bad taste and smell of the 2 Irish girls from the beginning of the video. When I discovered pheromone colognes and came to accept their effectiveness, I figured there was simply something pheromone related about these 2 women that repulsed me. I figured that it was just a statistical anomaly that I would hit up 2 such women one after another. However, it would not be until years later when I would date a 3rd Irish woman, who once again had a repulsive taste and smell to me, that I concluded that I seemed to be biologically incompatible with Irish women. This does not appear to be the case with the other nationalities of women I have been with throughout my life. Well, thankfully, Dublin is a metropolitan city, so I was not lacking for diversity of choice in nationalities. So, if you like this video and come to find that this stuff has really helped you, well, then consider throwing a donation my way or becoming a patron. Thanks for listening. Go team.